Still on the topic of defences and still looking at the law in England and Wales, we now move on to the next excuse, right? Defence excuse. We looked at the duress, and now we're looking at the other excuses which can work as a defense, which will be intoxication as well as insanity. Now, when we talk about intoxication, first question is that, is it a defense? Obviously, it's a defense. That's why we are discussing about it. That's why we're having this lecture. However, it will only work as a defense depending on, well, how it works as a defense. It will depend on what is the crime that is committed, right? Basically, we will be looking at the crimes in two categories. One is a basic intent crime, and the other is a specific intent crime. Now, before we look into that, intoxication is slightly different from the way how it works is slightly different from the other defenses. Most of the time, when we talk about defenses, is where there is the actus reus and then there is the mens rea, right? That's been satisfied, and then only you talk about whether was there what did the person have a defense or not. For example, did he act in self-defense when he killed the victim? Okay, so that means that he did kill the victim. There was an unlawful killing, and he intended to kill the victim. So actus reus and mens rea has been satisfied. Then the question is that whether did he act in self-defense or not. If he acted in self-defense, then he will be completely acquitted from the charge of murder. Similarly, when you talk about duress, a person may have committed robbery out of duress. So actus reus is satisfied, and the person clearly had the intention to do so. However, right? However, if he did so out of duress, then he can also be acquitted from the crime of robbery. So you see, for defenses, usually we need to talk about whether was there the actus reus and the mens rea, has a crime been committed or not, right? Actus reus and mens rea. Then only you talk about whether they are defenses. When it comes to intoxication, it is slightly different because of how intoxication works. Intoxication basically works to negate the mens rea, right? It works to negate the mens rea. We will see later on, right? Basically, a person shows a defense will raise the issue of intoxication to show that the defendant did not have the necessary mens rea, right? So intoxication is raised to negate the mens rea in the offense, to basically show that there was no mens rea in the commission of the offense. Okay, so how does it work? Well, it depends on whether is it a basic intent crime or is it a specific intent crime. Now, we talked about this previously, but just as a recap, a basic intent crime is where intention is not essential for mens rea, right? Intention is not essential for mens rea. So examples for this kind of offenses would be criminal damage that we have covered this semester, where a person need not have the intention to cause the damage or destruction of property, but he will still be guilty if he was reckless as to whether the property was destroyed or damaged. So you see, you do not need to show intention, right? You can still show recklessness, and therefore it is still sufficient in order to prove the mens rea by showing recklessness. So you do not need to show intention, and therefore criminal damage is a basic intent crime. Just like most of the other non-fatal offenses that we have covered last semester, assault and battery, where you do not need to show intention if you can show that the person was reckless. Similarly, also for offenses under Against the Persons Act, Section 47 and Section 20. So all those are basic intent crimes where the mens rea can be proved by showing recklessness, by showing something other than intention. That means you do not need to show intention in order to satisfy the mens rea. Now, if it is a basic intent crime, then the next question that you need to ask is that whether was the intoxication voluntary or involuntary? Excuse me. Right? Was the intoxication voluntary or involuntary? Now, this is pretty straightforward, right? If you drink the alcohol, For example, if you drink beer, you drink wine, and nobody forced you to do that, then if you become intoxicated, the intoxication is something that was voluntary. However, if you're forced to do that, or if somebody spiked your drink with alcohol and you become intoxicated, then it would be an involuntary intoxication. Now, what if a person does not know the strength of the alcohol, right? Uh, I always remember this incident when this was the first time that we actually drank vodka. It was a Smirnoff vodka, right? We've never drunk vodka before, and somebody brought a bottle to a friend's house, and we all decided to try it out. And we were surprised at how smooth it was, right? We enjoyed it, and one friend liked it so much and thought that, hey, this is actually it's so smooth. It doesn't feel it doesn't feel like it's got very high alcohol content. So he kept on drinking and drinking, and then he passed out. Okay. Uh, Now, the question then was that was his intoxication voluntary or not? On the one hand, you can say that it was voluntary because he drank it voluntarily. But on the other hand, he had no intention to become intoxicated. He had no intention to pass out actually. He just didn't know that the alcohol content was so high in the vodka that he drank. So in the case of Crown against Allen, right, it was held that when the accused knows that he is drinking alcohol, it is voluntary intoxication. And just because he doesn't know how strong the alcohol was, right, the precise nature or strength of the alcohol, it doesn't mean that it becomes an involuntary intoxication. It is still a voluntary intoxication. Okay, so if he drinks voluntarily and he knows that he's drinking alcohol, then it is voluntary intoxication. Now, if it is a basic intent crime and the accused became intoxicated voluntarily, case law says that intoxication will never be a defense. Okay, it will never be a defense, and the authority for this is the case of DPP and Majewski, as well as the case of Crown against O'Grady. Right, DPP and Majewski is the key case when you talk about intoxication. In DPP and Majewski, it was a case where the police received a report that the accused was beating up some people in a pub. So the police went to the pub there, and when the police arrived, he beat up one of the policemen. Then they arrested him, they took him back to the police station. And at the police station, he beat up even more policemen there, right? And his defense was that he was intoxicated, right? He was intoxicated. So these were basically all the non-fatal offenses. As mentioned just now, these are basic intent crimes, right? Basic intent crimes. And the court held that since he was intoxicated voluntarily, he cannot rely on that as a defense. Now, some of the reasons why the courts came to this conclusion is that if you intoxicate yourself, you are considered to be reckless, right? That's one of the reasons. So if you are considered to be reckless, and therefore you have satisfied the mens rea for basic intent crimes. Now, this has been criticized though, but in any event, that's how the law is now. If you voluntarily intoxicate yourself, it can never be a defense for basic intent crimes because you are actually acting recklessly when you intoxicate yourself. That's basically how it is looked at. In the case of Crown against O'Grady is similar also. The accused in this case, together with another person, they went out drinking the whole day. Then after that, they went back to his house, and the accused basically killed the victim in his house. And then he says that I was totally intoxicated at that time, right? I was intoxicated at that time, and basically the court held that for basic intent crimes, it can never be, right? It can never be a defense, right? It can never be a defense. Moving on to the case of Crown against Lippmann. Crown against Lippmann is important, right? Yeah, I always put out this picture. This is actually a very popular Beatles song, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, right? It's a very popular Beatles song. If you don't know Beatles, then you don't know music. Okay, all right. I may ask your parents about it. They will probably, or at least your grandparents, anyway, right? Now, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was also popular because of the lyrics of the song. It was very vague, right? And basically, the people say that the song was about being high on drugs, right? Being high on drugs. And what is the drugs that is involved in this song? If you look at the words, right, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, yeah, it's actually LSD, right? LSD. And in the case of Crown against Liebman, that was what the accused was high on, right? He he voluntarily took LSD. It's a drug. He got high, and then after that, he committed. He killed somebody, right? He killed somebody while he was high on drugs. Now, the question was then whether can he be guilty of manslaughter or not, right? Manslaughter being a basic intent crime as opposed to murder, which is a specific intent crime. So the court held that no specific intent was necessary to support conviction of manslaughter, as we mentioned, right? So this is not a specific intent crime. This is a basic intent crime, and the court concluded then that self-induced drunkenness or self-induced intoxication was no defense to manslaughter because it was a basic intent crime. And the court confirmed that when we talk about intoxication, when we talk about drunkenness, right, a person can be intoxicated or can be drunk, not just by alcohol. They can also be intoxicated due to taking drugs, right? The effects of drugs. So you see in the second bullet point there, the court held that for the purposes of criminal responsibility, there was no reason to distinguish between the effect of drugs taken voluntarily and drunkenness voluntarily induced. So a person can be intoxicated by alcohol, can also be intoxicated by drugs. Now, what if it was involuntary intoxication, right? What if intoxication was involuntary? Then the courts have held that it may be a defense, right? It may be a defense, but they must show that there was a lack of mens rea, right? They must show that there was a lack of mens rea. So the person was so intoxicated that he could not form the mens rea, right? He was so intoxicated that he could not form the mens rea. Now, just because a person is intoxicated doesn't mean that the person would is unable to form the mens rea. All right. So let me say that again. Just because a person is intoxicated does not mean that the person is unable to form the mens rea. So that's what was decided in the case of Crown against Kingston, where the court said that a drug intent is still an intent, right? A drug intent is still an intent. In the case of Crown against Kingston, the defendant in this case was actually a person with pedophilic tendencies, and he wasn't somebody else actually procured the crime, right? I suppose you can say the main culprit, but he wasn't the primary perpetrator, right? But somebody else, P, he actually lured a 15-year-old boy back to his place, and then he drugged that boy. Okay, he drugged the boy. He laced the boy's drink with drugs, and then the boy basically passed out. And then this person invited the defendant into to his place, knowing that the defendant was basically like a pedophile, and he got the defendant to sexually abuse that 15-year-old boy. So the defendant did so, but when the defendant was charged for indecent assault, he raised a defense of intoxication, and he said that just like how P drugged the boy, laced his drink and drugged the boy, P also drugged his drink, the defendant's drink, and therefore the defendant was also intoxicated, right, when he committed the offense. So it was an involuntary intoxication. Uh, But that doesn't mean that it will act as a defense, because he still must show that there was a lack of mens rea, and uh, the court decided that based on the facts that he still intended to sexually indecently abuse the boy, even though he was drugged at that time, right? Even though he was intoxicated involuntarily, he still wanted to, he still intended to commit the offense. So just to sum up, when it comes to basic intent crimes, if the intoxication was voluntary, then it can never be used as a defense. However, if the intoxication was involuntary, it may be a defense if it can be shown that the defendant was too intoxicated to form the mens rea, right? Too intoxicated to form the mens rea. Now, moving on to specific intent crimes, right? As opposed to basic intent crimes, for specific intent crimes, intention is a essential part, is a necessary part of the mens rea, right? If you cannot show there was the mens rea of intention, then you cannot prove the offense was committed, right? You cannot show that the offense was committed. So, which offense requires there to be intention, right? The most obvious example would be the offense of murder, right? You must have intended to kill or must have intended to cause grievous bodily harm. If there's no intention to do that, if it's just recklessness or negligence, then it becomes manslaughter. Now, if it's a specific intent crime, then the law says that there is no difference of whether was the intoxication voluntary or not, right? It doesn't matter whether whether it was voluntary or not. Intoxication may be a defense if it can be shown that the defendant was too intoxicated to have formed an intention, right? If he was too intoxicated to have formed an intention. And this was what was decided in Majewski also, right? When they talk about the law on intoxication, and they applied the case of Beard, right? In the case of Beard, where the accused was charged for murder, right? The accused was charged for murder, so it was a specific intent crime. And they tried to basically say that he was too intoxicated to form an intention. Now, if they was proven, right, it doesn't mean that he will escape completely, because then it can be manslaughter. Okay, but in the case of Beard, the court said that there was no evidence to show that he was drunk, right? No evidence to show that he was drunk. So therefore, they say that he could not have been too intoxicated to have formed an intention. So that's for specific intent crimes. Now, moving on to this area of, or to this defense of Dutch courage, right? Dutch courage. We mentioned about this last semester when we talk about contemporaneity, right? Basically, where the actus reus was present, the mens rea was present, but they were present at different times. So Dutch courage was basically is basically where a person has the mens rea to commit a crime, but before he commits the crime, he or she intoxicates himself or herself, so that when basically to gather the courage to commit the offense. So when at the time of the commission of the offense, at the actus reus of the offense, it may be argued that the person was so intoxicated to have formed the intention, but the intention was actually formed earlier on, right? The mens rea was actually formed earlier on. I think I mentioned last semester also about how they came up with this, why they call it Dutch courage, right? Not the English courage or German courage or Spanish courage. Why is it Dutch courage? One of the stories which I like the most was back in the Great Plague of London, right? I suppose it was worse than the pandemic that we are in now. Right back in the Great Plague of London, where a lot of people in London died, and the whole London was quarantined. Okay, because because of the disease that was there. So nobody can come out from London. Nobody can go into London, right? So what are they going to do with food? They're going to run out of food. Back then, they were not too worried about toilet papers, I guess, but they were going to run out of food. So what this what the group of Dutch people did was that they traveled right across the English Channel, and then they travel along the River Thames, right? Travel along the River Thames, and they will come to London, right, to the banks of London, and they will drop off the food there and supplies there, right, in order to help the English people. And then after that, they will go back. Now that was something crazy actually, because you are going right into the plague area, right? You're going right into the area where the plague is. So these people risk their lives, and it was something which was very very dangerous. And in order to gather courage for them to do so, apparently this Dutch men, they actually intoxicated themselves together to get the courage to do such a crazy act like that. And the English people, they were so grateful to these Dutch compatriots that they actually came up with this phrase Dutch courage to remember them, right? To remember this group of Dutchmen who took the risk in order to help to save lives of many people in London during the Great Plague. Now, unfortunately, Dutch courage has got a negative connotation. It's usually used when people say that they want to commit an offense, but they were but too scared, too chicken to commit the offense, and therefore they intoxicate themselves in order to commit the offense. And this was what happened in the case of AG for Northern Ireland against Gallagher. Gallagher wanted to kill his wife, right? But he had no guts to do so. So what he did was that he intoxicated himself and he went to kill his wife. And upon trial, he said that at the point of committing the offense, committing of the killing, he was intoxicated, right? He was intoxicated. Now the court held that it was not a defense, right? It was not a defense. The court confirmed that it can be a defense to murder if he was so drunk that he could not form the intention, or if he was so drunk that he can be considered to be suffering from insanity, right? But they found that in this case, no. This is what Lord Dunning said in the case of Gallagher, right? A person is guilty of murder whether he knew at that time when he killed his wife that to do so was wrong, or whether he did not know it. Because even, right, so he said in this case, right, he probably knew it when he killed his wife, that he had the menstrual for it. But even if he didn't have the menstrual for it, he had induced in himself by intoxication the lack of knowledge of wrongfulness, right? So the reason why he did not have the menstrual at the time was because he caused it by intoxicating himself, and therefore Lord Denning is not going to let him go, right? Let him escape based on that. So they found that he was still guilty of murder. So that's Dutch courage. Now, the law on intoxication has come under a lot of criticism. You can read about it on this slide here. It will be in the slides that's been provided on Times. And one of the things that has also been brought up regarding the law of intoxication is that why must there be a distinction between basic intent crimes and specific intent crimes? At the end of the day, it should be the same, right? The question is that whether was he too intoxicated to form the menstrual, right? Was he too intoxicated to be reckless? So therefore, he could not have been aware of the risk. Just by intoxicating himself doesn't necessarily should not be equated with being reckless to commit an offense, right? Shouldn't be equated with being reckless to commit an offense. That's one of the views. So you can read about it. This is the reform on intoxication. Doesn't look like it's going to gather any pace, right? So it's not really that important, but there has been some criticisms regarding this anyway. So just to recap again, for intoxication, we have to see whether was the offense a basic intent crime or specific intent crime. If it was a basic intent crime, then you got to see whether was the intoxication voluntary or involuntary. If it was a voluntary intoxication, then there can be no defense. However, if it was an involuntary intoxication, it needs to be a defense if it can be shown that he was too intoxicated to form the menstrual. But when it comes to specific intent crimes, it doesn't matter whether was it voluntary or intoxication or involuntary intoxication. The key thing is that whether was the person too intoxicated to form the intention. So it may be a defense when it comes to specific intent crimes, whether it's voluntary intoxication or involuntary intoxication, right? So you see how intoxication works basically is that is that it is used to negate mens rea, right? It is used to show that there was no mens rea. He was too intoxicated to form the mens rea, or he was too intoxicated to form the intention. All right, moving on. Insanity. This is the last excuse that we will be dealing under English law. Insanity is actually a common law defense, right? It's a common law defense, and basically it was in the case of McNaughton, right? In the case of McNaughton, where the House of Lords developed this defense. Okay, the House of Lords developed this defense in the case of McNaughton. McNaughton was a case where the accused murdered uh, another person. Actually, the accused was trying to assassinate the Prime Minister of Britain at that time, right? Sir Robert Peel, and but he shot another person, mistakenly, right? Mistaking that person for the Prime Minister. So transferred malice and all. He was charged for murder. However, he raised the defense of insanity, right? He raised the defense of insanity, and the House of Lords developed the defense of insanity in the case of McNaughton. So whenever we want to talk about insanity, we always refer back to the McNaughton principles or the McNaughton rules, as they call it. Now we're going to look at insanity under these three main headings. First, we're going to look at the burden of proof, and then, of course, most important is what are the elements that needs to be proved in order to show insanity, and finally, what is the effect of the defense. So this is again a special defense where the effect is not is the same as the other defenses. The other defenses, the effect would be an acquittal, right? Like for self-defense, it's all or nothing. You're either acquitted. If it's accepted, you're acquitted. If it's not accepted, then you will be found guilty for the offense that you are charged for, right? But let's start first with burden of proof. Now, this is also an exception, right? The House of Lords placed the burden of proof on the defendant. Now, we know that the golden thread that runs through criminal law, right, Wilmington, right, is that it is on the burden of the prosecution to prove the guilt of the defendant. So much so that when it comes to the defense of self-defense, the prosecution must show beyond reasonable doubt that the accused was not acting in self-defense. Right? So for all the defenses, the prosecution will have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that all the defenses are not applicable. However, when it comes to McNaughton, the burden is on the defense. If you want to raise insanity, then the burden is on you to prove, and it will be on the balance of probabilities, right? The standard proof is on the balance of probabilities. So the burden of proof is on the defendant to prove insanity on the balance of probabilities. Now moving on, what are the elements to show insanity? So we got the magic number 3 again, right? 3 elements to show the defense of insanity. First, it must show that the accused was suffering from a defect of reason, and this defect of reason arose because of a disease of the mind, right? So 3 Ds here, defect of reason, which arose from a disease of the mind, and this defect of a reason caused the accused to not know the nature and quality of the act, or not know that the act was wrong. So let's go through each element one by one. First, the element of a defect of reason. Now, basically, case law have said that this element is to show that the person was deprived of the ability to reason. So there's a defect of reason. You just cannot reason with this person. It's not that the person failed to reason out. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to argue about it. I don't want to reason it out to you. It's just that this person is unable to reason, right? Deprived of the ability to reason. And yeah, I know I'm very mean, but every time I talk about this, I always tell the class about one of my ex-girlfriends. Yeah, she's like that, right? Whenever something, it's an argument, then you try to reason with her. Well, it's because of this. You cannot be angry because of that, and the reason why it was done is because of this. Do you get it? And she's like, no. Okay, let me try that again. Let me try to reason with her again, right? And then she was like, no. And it's like, right? This girl is suffering from a defect of reason, right? It seems like she just is unable to reason, right? Sorry, is deprived of the ability to reason. Yeah, deprived of the ability to reason means that she is not able to reason. Not that she can, but then she doesn't want to be reasonable. But she was deprived of the ability to reason. Now, this need not be a permanent defect, right? So there's such thing as a temporary insanity. And in the case of Crown against Clark, this was a case where the accused was charged for shoplifting, right? She was charged for shoplifting, and then she tried to raise a defense of insanity, and she said that basically at the time I wasn't thinking, right? At the time I wasn't thinking. So in this case, it was not that she was deprived of the ability to reason, but that she just failed. She just failed to think about it. Not that she was deprived of the ability to do so, right? So in this case, she was found to be guilty, and the court basically found that there was no defect of reason. It's just that she was absent-minded. She just didn't think about it at that time. She was not suffering from a defect of reason. It must be deprived of the ability to reason. So that's defect of reason, but not all situations of defect of reason can amount to insanity, right? This defect of reason must be as a result of the disease of the mind, right? As a result of the disease of the mind. So you cannot say that I cannot say that my ex-girlfriend was insane, although at some point of time I did think so, but legally not insane, right? Because the defect of reason was not caused by a disease of the mind. Now, what's a disease of the mind? Okay, some of you will be able to recall this. We talked about this when we talked about automatism last semester, right? So it will be insane automatism as opposed to non-insane automatism. And insane automatism is basically caused by a disease of the mind. And the cause basically held that if it's what is a disease of the mind? It means that it is caused by something internally, right? It's caused by something internally. So much so that a person who suffers from sleepwalking and commits a crime while sleepwalking may arguably be able to raise a defense of insanity because it is caused by something internal, not caused by something external. Non-insane automatism is when something external, if a person takes in sugar, water, or takes in some drugs or something like that, it's an external cause. But if it's an internal cause, it's not caused by anything external, then it's considered to be a disease of the mind. And if the reason why the person is suffering from, if that's the reason why the person is suffering from a defect of reason, then you will see that it can be a defense of insanity. If the result of all this is that the person does not know the nature and quality of the act or does not know that it was wrong. So let's break it up, right? So the person does not know the nature and quality of the act or does not know that what he's doing is wrong. So let's look first at the first part. A person doesn't know the nature and quality of the act, right? So the person does something and did not know, right? Did not know that it has such an effect. One of the examples given, which I thought is a very good example, would be when a person says that let's cut off the victim's head and hide the head because it'll be very funny to see him trying to look for his own head, right? I mean, how can you look for your head when you don't have eyes to look for it? Okay, that's basically what person is thinking. So let's cut off his head because it's going to be funny to see him trying to look for his head. Now, he obviously doesn't understand or does not know the nature and quality of his act because when you cut off a person's head, he will die. He will not be able to look for his own head. So if a person thinks that it's going to be very funny to see him look for his own head, then clearly he doesn't understand the nature and quality of the act of cutting off that person's head. All right? So that's what it means to not know the nature and quality of the act. Or if the person doesn't know that what he is doing is wrong, right? Doesn't know what he's doing is wrong. And in the case of Coderre, the courts made it very clear that here wrong means legally wrong. It doesn't mean morally wrong, right? it must show that the person does not know that what he is doing is legally wrong, right? Is legally wrong and not morally wrong. And this illustrated in the case of Crown against Windle, right? In the case of Crown against Windle, it was a man who killed his wife, right? But you see, what happened in this case was that his wife basically wanted to commit suicide, and he decided to help the wife by killing the wife, right? So there's a question about whether was what he did morally wrong or not. It was almost like a euthanasia. The wife didn't want to live. The wife wanted to end her life, and out of mercy, the husband killed her, right? Um, However, the court didn't talk about whether did he know that it was morally wrong. Doesn't matter whether he felt that he was doing the right thing in order to kill her or not. At the end of the day, the question was whether did he know that what he was doing was legally wrong, was lawfully wrong. And unfortunately for him, when he was arrested, he was quoted to have said to the police that I suppose they will hang me for this. Right? I suppose they will hang me for this. That's why when you watch all these American movies, the Miranda, they always remind them that you have the right to remain silent because anything you say can be used against you, and that was used against him, right, in court, where it was said, where the court heard that he said that I suppose they will hang me for this, and that showed that he knew that what he was do, what he knew that what he did was lawfully and legally wrong. Doesn't matter whether he thought that it was the right thing to do at that time or not. He knew that it was lawfully wrong. So therefore, he was not allowed to raise the defense of insanity. So those are the three elements to show insanity. And finally, if insanity can be proven, what is the effect? Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that the person would be acquitted, right? If it can be shown that the person was insane. After all, if the person is insane, it may not be safe for the person to be acquitted. If it can be shown that it was temporary insanity and the person is now safe, then he or she may be acquitted. So the court has got a whole list of possible orders to make if it is found that the person is insane. Right? The court will declare that the person is not guilty by reason of insanity, but then the court will then have a discretion, wide range of discretion on what to order. One of the things, obviously, is to order that the person be institutionalized, put into a mental institution, in order to so that he will not be a danger to other people or to himself. Okay, so that's the defense of insanity, and so that brings us to the end of excuses for under English law. The next video we'll be looking at the defenses under Malaysian law, starting with justifications, and then we're also looking at the excuses under the Malaysian law.